Certainly, you can contact us offline. I know Caroline's been contacted a few times, so that's fantastic. So you can just reach out to us. We will publish it on LinkedIn. We will publish that it's ready and the recording's ready, and you'll then be able to access it from there. So I'm not sure if there are any questions now. Caroline, are you ready to go?
Okay, good. Well, we're doing master data, follow-on from the master data theme, and we're talking about how we're going to use the master party index. So how it is going to go into what that is. But I'm going to speak to you about the data privacy bit, and just to set the context and give you the storyline. So just a bit about me and a big caveat, I'm not a lawyer, this is not legal advice, okay? So you please take responsibility for your own privacy. Just very briefly, I know you've seen a refresh on the basics. I've been asked before to make sure that everybody's clear on the terminology. So I want to do that very, very quickly. I promise, Howard, I have this down now. But one thing I do have in here is just a new thing for you just to see, and we'll publish this for you, is just the history of POPI, where POPI came from, right? Right back in 1890, the right to be left alone became a legal concept. And OECD put guidelines in place in early 80s. And we moved through various conversations about privacy in PIA and our ECT Act, National Credit Act, and then eventually culminating in the POPIA Act from 2010 onwards. So WikiLeaks was really, though, when it became an international conversation, right? Data protection was in place before, but GDPR and things like that kicked in because of WikiLeaks. And really, we mustn't forget that everything we're doing here is on an international stage. Okay, it's one of the reasons that we have privacy. And just to give you a heads up, how many countries in the world have privacy? Just one thing, a correction on this though, is that it shows the United States as having privacy. That's not entirely true. Some states have privacy. It's not a federal law. So they're not actually considered a safe space. Alrighty, so how does privacy work when we're talking about privacy in South Africa? We're talking about the Protection of Personal Information Act. And what are the different terminologies, right? So first of all, you've got staff, customers, charities, directors, and more importantly, people who sign up for your direct marketing. So anybody who's a person is able to give you personal information, and they become data subjects under POPI. So that term, the data subject, means the subject of the data. And really what we're going to deal with today is really their rights and what POPI gives them that you have to provide them with. Your organization acts as a responsible party if you collect that information directly from other people, or don't actually, you can collect from other people on behalf of someone else. You are the responsible party if you call the shots. If you're saying, we want this data processed in this way, and this is why we're collecting it, and you're making a promise or some sort of contract with the data subjects. You might have suppliers and vendors, and you might flow that data down to your suppliers and vendors and tell them what to do with the data. Okay, and one of the instructions might be collect the data for us, right? So if you have an organization that's helping you to get marketing data, your suppliers are operators, and they process personal information under your direction, and you have to have a contract under POPI that has got to be under contract. What we're going to talk about today are these things, right? So your data subjects have got rights, and some of the rights are the right to notification, and they need to be in the position to be able to consent. In some situations, they must be able to consent, especially direct marketing. Data subjects have rights that you and your suppliers must honor. So in other words, if you are the supplier, if you are the operator, there are things that you have to do to support the responsible party. So everybody has a role to play when it comes to the rights of the data subjects. But it's the responsible party's job to make sure that data subjects' rights are protected. And what are some of those rights? Well, the one we're going to talk about today is data subject participation, and that's got to do with queries and updates, objection to processing, data transfer requests, and being informed. Under GDPR, data transfer request is a very specific thing. We don't really have that in POPIs like that. But if any of these people are in the EU, they have the right to portability. So they can ask you to give them their data in a certain format. And what we're going to deal with today is when you receive these requests, when people come and talk to you and ask you for things, how do you know who they are, and how do you know where their data is, and what data you have about them? So just to close out on POPI, the head of your organization, so you as the responsible party in the middle there, the head of your organization is the information officer under POPI. And just a reminder that you have to get your registrations in from 1st of May to 1st of July this year. Yeah, so you need to understand that ultimately the information officer is the person who's accountable. Am I coming across okay, Howard?
Yes, you are.
Okay, is that all clear? Like, does that help?
Yes, it does.
Cool. All right. Then I very briefly want to talk about the information lifecycle. Right. So I think Dharma training would cover these topics. I got from Howard. Yeah. Okay. And what we're going to talk about today is participation of the data subject in the life cycle. All right. So there are various things that you have to do. So one of the things is when you acquire, obtain, collect data, you need to notify the data subject about your intention, like what you plan to do with this. And this is why we have website privacy notices. Okay, I know we call them we call them privacy policies on our websites. Trust me, they're not policies, they're notifications. It's telling you what's happening with the data, why we're collecting it, how we use this data, if we use cookies, etc., etc. Because remember, collection isn't always me typing a form on your contact form, or providing you with my email address on your contact form. Sometimes it's you collecting information about me on the back end. So you might be collecting my MAC address or my location information, and you need to notify me about that. I need to be aware. That is one of my rights as a data subject. I then also have the right to consent to some things. So consent isn't absolutely necessary in all situations, and in fact, it's probably the worst case scenario. You must, use it as your last point of, as your last sort of option. But what it is you must have a justification for using my data. So when you tell me that you're using my data, you must tell me that you have a justification for doing it. And your justification could be so that you have a legal justification, or you have a contract of some sort, preferably a contract with me, or you're under some sort of obligation, or you have some sort of legitimate interest in doing what you're doing. If none of that applies, or if you're dealing with data that is generally prohibited, you must get consent. Okay, so if you're dealing with general prohibitions, if you're dealing with in my special personal information, which is my health information, trade union membership, my religious affiliation, my philosophical beliefs, anything, your health information, biometrics, those are all special personal information. And in those situations, you have to get my consent. Okay, unless one of the general authorizations applies. In general, you're not allowed to process special personal information unless one of the general authorizations applies to you. If nothing applies to you, you must have my consent. And it also applies to direct marketing. And direct marketing, remember, includes automated telephony. So like if I get an automated telephone call from someone selling me insurance, like happened the other day, that call has to inform me who is at the end, who is providing this voice call, who's contacting me. Okay, I have a right to know who's contacting me. If you are a service provider who does mail shots and mail listings and direct marketing, you need to go to your customer and make sure that they're aware that all of their communications has got to carry their details, right? Their information officer. Because remember, their information officer is ultimately responsible, and I must know who that is. The data subject also has the right to query. They have the right to ask you, how are you using my information? What information do you have about me? They have the right to say, I want you to stop doing it. I actually don't want you to do this. They have the right to object. And you have to know who that person is, and you have to know what data you've got of them. You've got to know what you're using it for, and you have to be able to respond to that person in what POPIA calls a reasonable amount of time. Now, warning, that might end up becoming a very specific amount of time if the regulator does start asking questions. I can also ask you, if I'm your data subject and you have information about me, I can ask you to correct it. So I have the right to approach you and say to you, you must change this information about me. So for example, I was the victim of identity theft, and somebody opened up a fraudulent account with a mobile service provider in my name with my ID number, and they used a random address. That random address ended up on my credit report. And it took me 3 years, literally 2 months ago, the Ombud was eventually able to get that address removed from all of my credit reports. Now, I shouldn't have to go through 3 years and an Ombud in order to make that happen, right? I mean, this is fairly fundamental. I never lived at that address. I should know whether I lived at that address or not. And I should be allowed to tell people that they, should correct this information. Usually this is done through some kind of self-help portal or some way of managing your information. I've had a similar situation with addresses as well with my bank, my credit card information, my credit card, home loan, and all with the same bank. Credit card, home loan, savings account, tax-free savings account, and my check account. Every single one of them had a different address. It was either spelt wrong, or it was completely wrong, or it was old. And one time I logged in and I downloaded my sort of automated report off of my banking app, and lo and behold, the address had some place up near Uppington. It wasn't even me. It was just the wrong address. So I now have the right to go object and complain to the regulator about that type of thing. I'm also allowed to tell you to destroy. Right, so I don't have to wait for you to decide that your retention policy has come up. I'm allowed to come to you and say to you, I want you to delete my information. And people normally sort of start getting a bit freaked out when I say that, but you must remember, under South African law, there's no such thing as an absolute right. Okay, so with all of these things, I don't have the absolute right to any of these things, just like you don't have the absolute right to decide what to do with my data. Our rights are a negotiation. And what we're aiming for at the end of the day is a happy data subject, right? We want somebody to feel like we are being open and transparent. We want to adhere to the conditions for lawful processing, one of which is openness. And basically, just in every way that you deal with my data, make sure I'm aware and that I'm involved and I can be there. POPIA doesn't leave it to chance. They tell us that we have to do certain things. We have to collect. We have to provide a notification, in our notifications, we have to provide particular types of information, and POPIA does stipulate that. The request for access has to be done through a specific form. So your website notification now should include that form that says, okay, Caroline, if you want to ask us for access to your information, you have to fill in this form, which is based on Section 23. And if I want the data to be corrected or deleted, there's a regulatory form. Regulation 3 there's actually a form that's been designed, Form 2, where I will request a correction or deletion. Now, what's interesting about these forms, which is something we can talk about now with Howard, I'm going to stop here. One of the things that's interesting to me about these forms is the key identifier on those forms. They ask for first name, surname, home address, and ID number. Okay, and I know from having experience with master party indexes before that very often that is not sufficient. Every organization has certain ways to identify people uniquely, to have a unique identification, right? And what I strongly recommend you do with these forms is go to your compliance officer, whoever it is that is busy implementing these forms in your organization. It might be in a POPIA manual, by the way. You need to go to them and say to them, listen, if we're going to respond to these requests, we have to know who the person is. And therefore, if they are a customer of ours, they have got to provide us with additional information, which might be our customer number, or it might be a reference number of some sort. Maybe if you're a call center, maybe it's a reference to a call log, something that will tell me who they are. That is more specific than the generic information that the forms request. So that's just a heads up to make your life a little bit easier when it comes time to looking at forms. So that's what I've got there. I thought I might just show you this page, which is what the regulator is allowed to ask for, the stats they can ask for under PIA. Number of requests received, granted in full, refused, or granted partially, why it was refused, if they've appealed, if they've gone back to the regulator and said, well, we're not happy, I actually do want this information. This is based on the PIA reporting for public bodies, which is mandatory. And PIA says you can have it for private bodies. And if it's not unlikely to me that the regulator could start asking for this kind of thing for POPIA. Okay, so just to keep track of whatever participatory activities happen. You want to keep track of it. You want to know the stats and where it's been. Okay, that's pretty much it, guys. Howard, if you want to take it away.
If I could ask you to go back 2 slides, I just wanted to start with the discussion. I like that one more, this one. So what I found interesting in our discussions with Caroline, which is very different to the way in which we currently do master data, is that when a data subject requests to destroy the information or not to send marketing and advertising information, it's quite different to the way that we handle some of our master data at the moment, where we can actually delete the customer from our master data system. Of course, it depends on the transactions, or you can DID that person, but we also have to be aware of this, that they've asked for that, and we almost need to keep a level of data about them so that we don't start talking to them or start marketing to them again. So that's a little bit of a change that we find. Normally, if people close their accounts or whatever it is, that destroy an archive, in a way, we should not be destroying if there's a request never to be spoken to again or marketed to or whatever it is. You become sort of active still within our master data domain.
Yeah, so the way that I've seen people handle that is that you almost have like what I call a stub of information. It's almost like a cigarette stub, right? So it's like a PI stub. So it's just enough information to know who the person is. It shouldn't be so much information that everybody knows everything about the person if the data gets lost, but it should be enough so that you know about the person. So like, for example, for a mailing list, if I tell you I want to unsubscribe, or if I object, if I say to you, I do not want you to ever contact me electronically again, you need to know that for all time across all of your the whole organization, all functions, all communications must know that I have got just a fundamental objection to being contacted. So you're going to have to know something about me. You're going to have to know at least my email address, if not my phone number. You probably don't need my ID number and my full name and my home address, but you know, you do need to know enough. At least some sort of unique identifier, something. Maybe it's a hash, you know, something that tells you who I am.
Yeah, and so I was wondering, just that I was actually quite interested in terms of the people that have started with data privacy and are using master data. It almost seems as if there's an extra set of attributes. When we talk about a 360-degree view of a customer or an employee, there's almost a set of data privacy attributes that need to record this, and that was fascinating to me, and I just really enjoyed working with the master data and realizing how much I can get from master data to support my data privacy, and the little elements that I need to add on to achieve what we're talking about here. So yes, the marketing department may receive something to say, don't advertise to me, but everyone needs to know about it. And we all have to be aware of what the customer has communicated to us in this regard.
Yeah, and it's put the focus on the smiley happy face, right?
Yeah.
Always keep the data subject at the middle of the whole conversation. Like, it doesn't matter if you've now got if you've gone into a joint venture and now you're going to market to your old customer set. Like, will I be happy if I've already told you don't contact me?
Yeah.
How happy am I going to be? You know, I don't care whether you've got a whole new exciting idea that you want to tell me about. Yeah. So that's very key. So yeah, just to be
Paul, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, just a question. So Caroline, from a legal perspective, right? So is it really true that a company needs to know about never contacting a person again? Because I mean, on the one hand, there's a shared responsibility as well, right? If I tell a company you need to delete my data, then in theory, look, they shouldn't contact me in the first place because I haven't given consent to it in the new world. But is it fair of me as a as a just normal person on the street, is it fair of me to expect a company to never contact me again from a legal perspective? Is that really
well,
true?
look, I can't speak from a legal perspective because, as I said, I'm not a lawyer. But my understanding is that this has been a thing in the ECT Act for a long time. So POPIA has kind of like taken, changed the ECT Act,
Yeah.
the electronic communications. But my understanding from that was that any electronic communications, I have the right, a right to generally just say, don't contact me. I'm not contactable. It's a prior objection. So POPIA actually says, in the list of checks and balances on whether or not I can send someone direct marketing, one of the checks is like, is there any prior objection? And so yeah, and you must remember the duty lies on with the responsible party. If I can just jump here, we're talking about consent, and we're talking about people. You really have to know. You have to keep. You have the obligation to tell people. You have the obligation to keep track of what has happened as the responsible party. And to protect my rights as a data subject. So yes, I can literally expect you to obey, like to be cognizant of that. If I haven't given you consent to contact me and you require my consent, remember this is if you require my consent. Okay.
Yes, but that's
require my consent. Direct marketing you do.
Yeah.
It's
a matter of direction, right? So one direction is, look, I'm not giving consent that you contact me. That's one thing. It's another thing to say, you are never allowed to contact me ever again.
Look, I think it'll play out. I think I wouldn't get too stressed out about it right now. I would, as far as possible, because remember, POPIA is there's a lot of things in POPIA that sort of say, if reasonably possible. So, or if it is practical, so there are obviously, it's not an absolute law. It's not like I said, there's no absolutes, right? The responsible party also has rights. They have to run their business. They have a right to their legitimate interests. So, it's all a balancing act. That's kind of my understanding of POPIA and South African law in general. Is everything is a balancing act. But on the whole, if you can keep that subject happy by respecting their wishes, then do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so don't get too tied up in sort of detail and kind of what if analysis.
All right.
Okay, that's what lawyers are for, by the way. If you ever find yourself in that position, then
yes.
That's what I said.
All right.
Okay, good. I think that's enough from me. I want to jump into the good stuff that Howard has got planned.
We have two other questions. There's a question from you.
Thanks, Howard. I wanted to respond to the previous one. To the question asked. So not only is it fair for a customer to request you never to contact them again, but in terms of precedence and what has happened in particularly starting in Europe, you remember that in the heydays of telephones, we used to have something called do not call. So the whole concept of saying if you don't want people to contact you for telemarketing or for marketing purposes, it's not new. And therefore, there is legal precedence to that effect. And remember that our legal framework has consideration for foreign law, but a particular strong focus on English law as well as Roman Dutch law, okay?
Yeah.
In addition to indigenous law. So we then look at those kinds of things that have happened in other jurisdictions as well. But fairly speaking, if you approach a customer for your interests and a customer pulls out, when you go again to that customer, you may quite well be sued because they made their intentions quite clear. A customer's requirements override your interests where they have indicated so.
Okay, good. Yeah, I totally agree.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Stephen?
Yeah, actually, I was going to mention something similar as well. I've been working with GDPR, and it's basically the subject has the right to know or to be notified what you're using, what the company is using the data for, and within that information, you have the statute of limitations of the legal, let's say the legal rights as well from the company point of view. So, for example, if the subject says, "Please remove my data," the company has legal obligations as well, and the subject needs to be notified. For example, we need to keep your data for 5, 7, or 10 years, depending on the statute of limitation, and highlighting we need to keep this data, your data, for this period of time for legal reasons, and actually communicate that to the subject.
Yes, and that's an important point. It's even in POPI. It actually it gets complex. You know, like when you the request for information, for example, there are specific instances where you may not provide information. We actually are not allowed to provide information according to POPI. Never mind anything else. So there are nuances and caveats to all of this, and the devil's in the details with all of these things. And I think it's super important to, the main point we want to get across today is, obviously we're not going to become legal experts on when you may or may not share information, but the first thing is you've got to make sure that you're giving it to the person. If someone's asking for data, you must make sure you're giving it to the right person. And if you are, so you've got to have your house in order, and that's really what this conversation is about, is whatever the legal requirement is, whatever the point is, it's complex. You've got to know that you're talking to the right person. You've got to have the right information. You've got to know whether or not you're allowed to provide the information, or whether you have to provide the information. And I think it's very important for data managers and the data back end to be in a position of strength in that regard. You know, that obviously your compliance and risk officers and your information officer ultimately are responsible for making sure that that is correct, that legal mandate is correct. But but I want to jump into the conversation with Howard now to get the stuff you've done there, because I think it gives a lot of practical insight into how this works. Okay, thanks, Caroline. All right, so this is the deck that we're constantly publishing, and today our focus is going to be on the master data side of it, and how do we use master data management to achieve what we've just been talking about, or what Caroline has presented. So I really like this image from Informatica, and here it talks about making use of master data, and of course there's data quality and workflow. Those are ingrained within master data, and we can see what Informatica has done is that they've actually created what Paul keeps on talking about in our other presentations from master data, is there's to an extent there's a master data usage. So in this scenario, we're talking about, we've got our subjects which are master data, and you can see that our subjects are from all sorts of other systems. We've got the consents that they provide to us. Again, these are attributes that I never really thought about in terms of the 360-degree view, the rights that they have, and then policies. So all of these things are really helpful, and it's really interesting to make use of our master data system to support it. I certainly don't suggest, if you're in trouble trying to get everything going, to introduce a master data system. If you have one, that's fantastic. That means you've got an understanding of your customers, and it may be easy to add the elements on. So what the slide talks about is we now have our different systems, the CRM, ERP, HR, and third-party data. So it's helpful to understand that we have customers and contacts and vendors sitting in our CRM. In our ERP, we can have a customer, we've got providers, and we've got billing information. In HR, we're talking about our employees, external people, related elements, and providers. And in our third-party data, for example, Reuters and Bloomberg, we've got customers, we've got accounts, and we've got contacts. So be careful of understanding, or it's really nice to see how much data about our party and what we refer to as a master party index that we need to keep together in a master data system. Okay, so what I wanted to just take you through briefly is almost what, and we had a lovely question on master data in the webinars 2 Thursdays ago, in terms of saying, how do we go through this process? How do we initiate it? Now, I like this idea of identifying our systems of record. So, and that's sort of what I was referring to here. These are our systems of record: CRM, ERP, third-party HR. Now the question is, where are we going to get the main business key from, and who's going to be
what we refer to as system of authority, or the authoritative source. And we got these all over. So we've got customers in CRM and we've got customers in ERP. Who do we go to? Who is the right element? So to identify, when we identify the system of record, we now understand all the data that we're going to keep, or the 360 view of customers, employees, providers, vendors, and this gives us our complete set of attributes. So that once we've chosen all the systems of record, there we have the comprehensive set of attributes about our parties. Okay, then when we choose the authoritative source, what I like there is almost what we named this thing, or MPI, which is our master party index or identity. This becomes our identity information, the root, the authoritative source of identity information. And then we can have a scenario where the different systems may be the authoritative source for column sets within the customer. Okay, so each one may be focused on a different series or set of attributes that you need to bring in to the equation. So identify your system of record, then understand or choose your authoritative source, one for identity, and then the other one that we talk about is the column sets of the 360-degree view, or the complete sets. We then go into now moving the data into MDM, and when we move the data into MDM, we've got to pay attention to quality. We've got to ensure that we're matching properly so that we don't get the duplicate records. We did talk with Paul again in terms of saying, do we bring all of our stuff into the master data and then we clean up, or do we try to ensure as much as possible that we don't bring in a duplicate, or we adhere to that golden, the golden record? I know that's not the best of terms anymore, but to keep that golden set of attributes correct. So, and then we load the data into MDM. Once we've got it in, then we keep on maintaining that information on an ongoing basis. And when we have to maintain that profile, the golden profile, we have to now handle collisions. We have to manage the survivorship. And we also need to get involved with data space versioning. So when we version certain elements of data, and we've now progressed, how do we manage those versions? Once we've done that and we've got this golden profile going, then it's about ensuring that we can publish to our subscribers. And I've just added one subscriber in there. BI tends to be the first beneficiary of master data, so in my experience, but we can also help other applications receive information or take on data or static data about the customers. So as an example, if we had the CRM first, and then we built the master data, when we bring the ERP in, we can then bring the customer data from the master data system into ERP, and then we can have a publish and subscribe mechanism going there. All right. Then the next one is building the dimensions. So we then refer to dealing with the different versions of a customer record. So how do we manage slowly changing dimensions? That's something that certainly that master data can help you with. And the other one that I find not many of your systems, like your CRM or your ERP, have a hierarchy that's good for BI and analytics of your customers. So you also get a lot of benefit out of building hierarchies in master data that will be provided to the BI reports, so we can drill down across the different customer categories. Okay, then if we look at the different data domains, so that's something that we all do, depending on your master data tool. If you've got a multi-domain master data system, then you probably have a party there already. And when we talk about party, here's some examples of, in privacy, we refer to it as data subject, but it could be your customer, your employee, and your vendor. And one would want to bring that into a master party, so all three of them benefit from that information. Our data processes, or what we refer to as the registry of processing activities, Once again, that's a domain. So what are the processes? What are the work items that we have? I'm sure some of you guys have worked with something like that. I can show you an example in SAP where they actually have work items and billing and things like that. And you can, even to an extent, you could be storing your ROPA or aspects of your ROPA in the master data domain. Data assets, same way as you bring in assets into a data domain, you could also be bringing in your data elements with the appropriate classifications, data policies, data agreements, contracts, and the data rights. So these are almost the master data domains for data privacy. Okay, so just in terms of a mapping, so I'm sure those of us, the data management professionals, especially in the master data domain, if you've been around for long enough, you've certainly dealt with some of these areas, customer service, you've dealt with audits, assets, operations, policies, and there's just another example which is on construction planning. And we can see now that we have this mapping now of our data privacy master data to the well-known master data domains. I hope that's making sense. So what we can see is a lot of the master data, the way master data has been used can be applied for data privacy. And of course, the nice benefit you get out of that is if you're making use of this master data technology, when a customer comes along and says, what information do you have about me? And you've been able to link the data subject to the different systems and where the assets are, you can then you can make use of the master data to answer these questions. So that's one of the areas that I always fear and worry about. How much work is it going to take us to be able to answer some of these questions? And if a subject says, what information do you have about me? That's not an easy answer. All right, so just taking you guys through a process. What we had here was the system of record. Remember, we said we start with identifying our systems of record. So here I've just got the labels here, and you can see I've got customer duplicated over a few of the areas. I've got it in CRM, I've got it in ERP, and I've got it in third party. And we may also be in a situation where our employee is a customer as well. So now I've got these data domains and information about our party all over the place, and I've got to bring it together. I've got to consolidate all this information and ensure that that if the individual or the party is a customer and a provider and an employee, that I understand all of these different aspects to the customer, to the party. Sorry. So the next step, as I spoke about, is to say establishing the authoritative data source. So who is it? And just a quick definition there is the authoritative data source is the repository or system that contains identity information about an individual / party and is considered to be the primary and most reliable source for this information. So that's one of the important steps that we have to take and go through when we do the planning for master data, is to understand who is our authoritative data source. Everyone's very quiet. I hope that if you have a question, you'll put your hand up. I'm sure you will. This is one element that I've done not using this acronym. I recently discovered it. Certainly keeps me a reminder to me in terms of what I need to look at when I evaluate those sources. Is first of all focusing on the currency. How recently was the information published? So when you want to choose a system for the authoritative source, you've got to look at the updates or when the information's arriving. Okay, and if your information if there's a latency within that, and as an example, if I choose my ERP as the customer system and it arrives in my CRM through some form of marketing, I've got to have a bit of a problem in terms of getting my identity right. And then is this data current enough for your topic? So do we have the right level of currency? Reliability. So can you trust the accuracy of the source? So is CRM as reliable as we need it to be? I've certainly worked on certain CRM systems, but then again, I must admit I've worked on procurement systems that you think are really up to date, and the vendors are a bit of a mess. But anyway, you have to evaluate the sources according to this criteria. And then the authority. So who is the author, and who's the author of that information? Where does it come from? And are they considered within your organization to be an expert on that element? So I've certainly had customers where we look at establishing a identity of a bank or a party, whatever it is, and there's different departments that set up that identity, but we have to go to the authoritative source. And what I mean by that is to say, for example, who would register the customer as a customer, or who would register the bank or register this entity? That's the person that you need to start off to set up the authority. And then, why was this information collected? What was the purpose for this information? So we now have to be careful as well in terms of making use or bringing that into the master data domain. Okay. So what you can see, and you'll see this all over the place, is when you do these master data systems and you start looking at it, I've got customers all over the place, and I've got to create a single golden profile of the customer. And I've got suppliers all over the place, and I've got employees all over the place. So this is not a simple job, and don't think that you just set up an MDM, you set up the area and then you start populating, and then you start realizing, oh, but this other system over here has got a better definition of my customers than what I've got here. Then it's a bit late now that you've got all these golden profiles in the master data system, and they're not actually the right elements, and they're not the right identity. Okay, so this is a conceptual model for the party domain, and I'm sure you've seen that. We had Len Silverstone talk to us about the different roles, the party roles, the relationship types, and you can see we have vendor, employment relationships, we have customer relationships, we have organizational roll-ups, and we've got partnerships. All of these are almost a different relationship that we as the organization have with the second party. So typically, these are our relationships between ourselves and our customers. Then we have the party role, and these are almost our role classifiers. Typically, we have this as a customer, employee, supplier, contact, and then even position. So what I'm noticing, certainly with HR systems and learning pathways and learning management, we start setting up positions, and then parties are performing a role defined by the position. Of course, when we have a party model, we have to certainly understand the types of parties, be they individuals, be it organizations, be it franchises, because associated with a franchise is going to be all sorts of personal information, the managers or the owners of the franchise, and the latest one now is a bot in terms of a party type. So this is just a simple model. What you're not seeing here is all of the almost the identification or the contact information that's associated with a party. But that hangs off a party, and it's added to the party level. But these are what we see as important, or what I've just tried to focus on, these different aspects of the party domain. And any questions on the conceptual data model for the party domain? So notice just how easily we can map our data subjects to this party domain. Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for that. Quick question. Can you just talk a little bit more about a bot being as a party type classifier? Because it's the first time I've heard of that before. And it doesn't seem kind of a natural place to have it.
Yeah, and I think IBM updated it. I saw the first update coming through about two and a half years ago, where these bots are almost auto answering and communicating with people, be it Twitter, be it almost auto responding on your website, and they are having certain interactions. Now, the communication is actually now happening from this party being a bot, and they tend to get given names, and they develop a life and a language and an understanding of their own and how they interact with other parties.
Yeah, and I would step in there and just say, obviously they don't have rights under POPIA, so not yet anyway. But an organization or a franchise does have rights under POPIA.
Yeah.
And with the bot, I think it is important to understand it as a party, but also to understand it as a point of data collection.
Yes. Yes.
So, and all of your notification requirements need to be satisfied in the way that your bot communicates with the data subject.
Right. Andrew, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. As I said, it's new to me. I wouldn't have thought about putting bots into a master data sort of catalog per se, but it's definitely food for thought.
Mm. Yeah, and they actually, these bots, as they progress, they tend to interact with a certain number of people, and they have relationships and interactions with that. So there's a lot more that mechanism of communication is happening through that bot with the customer.
Great, thank you.
So if I can just interject there as well, there is a robot law is becoming a thing. So because we have robots acting.
Yeah.
So there are now having to be laws created around the robots, and it's got nothing to do with Asimov, okay? It's not about that. Well, it is a little bit, but not entirely.
Right.
It's real law. Yeah.
Okay.
I digress, but off you go. Thanks, Howard.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I work with so many of these data models, and when I saw the bot come along, I said, wow, it's amazing what level of prominence these interactions with people are getting. So this is just a mind map that I liked in terms of understanding. Yes, we have our party master entity here, is a type of master data, and then what we've got is other terms that we are seeing our customer as a citizen, as a member of a group, a patient. So these are different ways in which different industries relate to that customer. Passenger is a customer. We're keeping data about our passengers. Students, consumers, households, all of these elements are customers to us. So nice to have an understanding of all of those different areas so that you're managing the data appropriately. So what Informatica shared and in terms of this data privacy application that's sitting on top of the master data system is that it manages the records of processing, so the ongoing activities of processing data, and who's looking at what and which data sets. So almost that roper now has become part of the master data system. So that was, wow, there's lots that one is able to bring into a master data system. Data retention policies that they can look after, the timely fulfillment of data subject rights. So that's what Caroline was talking about, is if I've given you consent or if I've removed consent, have you dealt with it? And are all systems dealing with it? Has everybody been notified? All the subscribers for that information, have they been notified about the data subject rights? And then, of course, the benefit of this is if you're having it in that centralized and consolidated area, the minimization of data breach risk. So the one lesson that I learned when I was working in the credit card industry was the very first thing that people started doing was reducing the amount of information that was kept about the credit card holder just to a single ID, and nothing else was known about them. And all this data was sitting in a removed master data system that kept all the information. So if you just have an ID there, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you don't have Howard Diesel and all the other information on that, then the risk of the breach has been reduced tremendously. Okay, so this is almost what we can now be providing to our people. When Jane Smith comes in and says, tell me all you know about me, using a master data system, we can now say, well, this is the basis for the processing. You've given us consent, or this was legitimate interest. You sitting in these different data assets in this system and that system, and these are the processing activities that we performed on your data and that we are aware of, and then the types of data. So this scared the hell out of me when I first got an understanding of privacy and the type of reports that we may need to produce to our customers, in terms of how was I going to get hold of all of the things that we were doing to Jane Smith, what business processes were running, what data we were keeping, where we were keeping the data, what consent. I thought we had to write all these massive systems to actually, or a big system to try to keep this together. And I think Informatica have solved the problem very eloquently, and I like what they've done in terms of preparing this information. So I just wanted to check people if they can now start seeing the value of master data and keeping information about the person and being able to respond in an appropriate time. Okay, so then I moved on a little bit after the master party identity that we spoke about. I've just gone and shown what sort of master data requirements a registry of processing activity requires. So within the party domain, who's the controller, who's the contact, who's the processing or the operator, who's the data protection officer, and who are the third parties. These are the type of information we can be keeping within our master data system. Within our policies, we've got the retention schedule and then processing activities. Of course, in the last couple of months, we've spoken and shown you all the reference data that's required to keep a correct or an appropriate ROPA. So there's so many reference data elements there as well. So what I wanted to show you then, just as an example of a mapping to SAP, what they've done, we can see basically they're making use of the SAP MDG, the different elements where we can keep our data assets. We can understand our data subjects in terms of business partners, suppliers, customers, contract agreements, register processing activities, so maintenance, work items, and then our data subject on procurement in purchasing. Okay, that's I know I went through that pretty quickly, but are there any questions? Is there anything you'd like to talk about? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you have any experience how the master data could work on more decentralized data infrastructure, like not data lakes, but lake houses or data mesh, or those initiatives that are coming that are not more to decentralize and to democratize data across the organization.
It's a good question, and we actually, Stephen, we're going to be dealing with it. Paul is going to be dealing with it tomorrow, where we talk about master data architectures in terms of having a federated or a hub and spoke, where we could be within a certain data lake, we could be keeping information about the party there, and then it's really just the IDs that are centralized, so that when you go and ask for a party, you can say, all right, he's sitting in this system, in that system, and the different other systems that you have within that, whoever keeps the data, and depending on your level of federation. So you could federate at a country level, you could federate at a system level, and so you build the hub and spoke type of scenario.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Paul, that's correct, right? I hope I put the responsibility that you will be sharing this tomorrow.
Well, yes, you've just added a section in my slide, anonymously. But yeah, I think it's generally correct. I think it'll depend more on the business or the almost the legal requirements as opposed to technical requirements. I mean, technically you can deal with it, but I haven't seen a lot of a registry-based model actually. Most people sort of go for
what I have seen, Paul, is and where I've dealt one or two customers where They were operating very much in a siloed area. They then established some form of master data system, and as an interim step before going into centralized, we built a registry hub and spoke, just to say, okay, these guys are all sitting over here. That helped us then translate into a centralized one. Interestingly enough, we haven't gone there yet. So that was the first time that it dawned on me, is that I can make use of the hub and spoke to connect all of these different disconnected distributed systems.
Yes, yes. Okay, that's interesting. Because another way that problem could be dealt with is if your MDM software suite is feature rich enough, let's put it that way, then you basically keep separate data sets, but they're based off the same model, so they look, they've got the same structure, but you basically use the MDM software to keep them separate. So it's kind of handled not by data, as in keys linking back and forth, but rather specific areas in the suite, physically different and physically separated spaces where we store the data.
Oh, okay. All right.
So Howard,
yes.
If I could just jump in just to close out, if I could just bring it back again, I saw what you got there, the penalties and fines and POPIA and the data elements that carry the most risk. I just want to remind everybody again, if you don't have a master data system, or if you're looking at this and kind of going, oh, good grief, half of our systems are not in the master data, and we have a lot of work to do, and we're 2 months away from POPIA. What are we going to do? What I would say to you is just remember, nothing dramatic is going to change on the 1st of July. It's not as though the regulator is going to come and knock on your door, unless the people that you use the data you process are moaning a lot already. Then maybe they will. But what I want to say is take a risk-based approach. Help yourself by understanding which data is the most risky. So we've done that before. We've spoken about risky data. Understand your risky processing. And your number one risky processing, well, besides direct marketing, which is fairly obvious, I think, in everyone's mind, the most risky processing you have right now is anything that would qualify for prior authorization.
Right.
Prior authorization is the one thing that carries the maximum penalty under POPIA. Yeah.
No, I was agreeing with you. Definitely.
Yeah. And it's really like if you only get one thing right in the next 2 months, is find any data subjects and any processing that qualifies for prior authorization, and get that data under control. Like literally, I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, because they can actually stop your business processes, and they can stop your any processing on that data.
Well, it's also if the regulator looks into it and they decide that you are doing processing like that after the 1st of July and it's not authorized, that's when you can get slapped with a 10 million rand fine.
Wow.
I'm very hesitant to talk about fines and penalties of POPIA, because it's really not that kind of law. Like, it's not like GDPR. It's not intended to be a massive big stick. But except for the 4 instances where prior authorization is required. And if you have queries about that, I did try to summarize it all for you, and I've given you links in that link. I've given you links of the form that you must use, and the guideline and everything that the regulator has recently just published about about how to apply for prior authorization, and their guideline on what is prior authorization. And I unpacked it a bit for you. But if you don't understand anything about your master data, please get to grips with the master. They're impacted with that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions, guys?
All right, good.
Thank you.
Well, Howard, it's been great, as always, to see POPIA come alive.
Yes.
Lovely. I'm so excited. And master party indexes, man. I do think it's going to be some of the magic sauce for POPIA.
Yes, I think so.
I think even if you can't get the informaticas, I know a lot of companies don't want to spend money. If you can't get the informaticas to help you, at least there's some beginning of sanity on that. Then just apply your risk, and you'll be able to figure out what to do first. And it'll be fine.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
Good. Great. Thanks,
Cheers,
Howard.
Mark.
Thanks, Caroline.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank you
Albert.
very much.
Thank you.